So for this first class, we are going to be discussing the works of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Adam Smith, with a particular focus on their philosophizing on human morality as it unfolds in society. We will go in chronological order, starting with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was born on June 28th of 1712 in Geneva, Switzerland. Rousseau would die in 1778. In addition to being a political philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau is also a fiction writer and a musical composer, and he also initiated what we know today as the modern autobiography. Okay, so Rousseau was born into a Calvinist family. Later in his life, he would move from Switzerland to France when he would convert to Catholicism. It has been speculated that Rousseau was reacting to Calvinism's insistence on some of the inescapable negative qualities of human nature. One of Rousseau's biographers writes that in Geneva, Calvinists were largely, quote, required to declare that we are miserable sinners, born in corruption, inclined to evil, incapable by ourselves of doing good. End quote. As we will get into, this is very much stands in contrast to Rousseau's thinking about human nature. Um, this characterization of Calvinism in Geneva allowed Catholicism to appear more attractive by comparison, particularly because of Catholicism's doctrine of forgiveness of sins. However, on returning to Geneva in 1754, Rousseau would reconvert to Calvinism and regained his official Genevan citizenship. Rousseau advocated for what is called religious indifference, meaning that he believed that all religions are equally worthy and that people should therefore conform to the religion in which they were brought up. This was a controversial stance, referring to all religions as being equal in respect to how they lead human beings and worshippers to virtue. This caused Rousseau's books to be banned in France and Geneva, and his books were burned, and warrants for his arrest were issued. An arrest was issued by Parliament against him, causing him to flee Switzerland. Um, Voltaire, the very famous philosopher, issued an invitation to Rousseau to come and reside with him, commenting that, quote, he, meaning Rousseau, must come. I shall receive him with open arms. He shall be master here more than I. I shall treat him like my own son. End quote. Despite this very warm invitation, Rousseau would not respond to the invitation, something that Rousseau claimed to later regret. Rousseau wanted to stay in Switzerland, but was eventually forced out, and he decided to accept the philosopher David Hume's invitation to reside with him in England. Rousseau and Hume would later have quarrels with one another, some of which were public and put into writing. All right, we are now going to start referring to the text, the assigned reading today. It's an excerpt from Discourse on the Origin of Inequality. On this slide, we'll be covering some of the material on page 40. So if you have it out, please turn to page 40. So in this segment, Rousseau sets out to understand inequality. And he starts off by saying that in order to understand inequality between human beings, we must first understand some things about human nature. It is Rousseau's view that human nature is very distinct from the way in which humanity appears because of the way that society has altered, quote, the human soul. He talks about how human nature, after being socialized and after being exposed to society for so long, ends up in a form that is hardly recognizable from what primitive human nature actually is. Rousseau has somewhat of an anti-human progress stance, progress in terms of sheer advancements in reason, knowledge, science, etc. He sees these advancements as not good things, but rather even refers to them as being cruel and a mockery to the more benevolent nature of human beings when they are in their primitive state. It is the very the knowledge that we refer to in a positive light that we acquire is actually doing great harm to our human nature and making us more distant from our true human impulses and our true human nature. On the same page, he acknowledges that with a quick glance at human beings and human society, one might very well come to the conclusion that human nature is wicked, purely self-interested, with no morality in mind, inclined to violence, etc. However, Rousseau wants to convince us here in this segment that a closer look at the foundations of human nature will actually reveal that the violence and all of the wicked and injustice and inequality in the world is actually not deriving from human nature at all. So turning to page 41, and to make this case, Rousseau first divides the two different forms of inequality among human beings. He says are things such as a natural or physical inequality between human beings, referring to health, bodily strength, etc. And then for more pertinent to present purposes, that there are moral and political inequalities between human beings. These matters depend more on social convention than human nature. He quickly dispenses with the matter of natural inequality between human beings, saying that these are so self-evident that we hardly even need to make an argument for them. No reasonable person would contend otherwise, that there aren't natural inequalities between humans. He therefore discusses more the moral and political bases for inequalities between humans. To understand this focus on the moral and political, I will direct you to the right column up at the top on page 41, where Rousseau writes the following. The subject of the present discourse, therefore, is more precisely this: to mark in the progress of things the moment at which right took the place of violence and nature became subject to law, and to explain by what sequence of miracles the strong came to submit to serve the weak. So here we're having our point of departure is to better understand how these things so radically changed from human nature in its primitive state. The first point he goes to better understand humans' sociality rather than humans' nature is to look at how language was, what he suspects how language was probably born and how it probably evolved. So he said that the first forms of language that human beings use was most likely, as he calls it, the cry of nature. That meaning a language used in urgent situations when one is in dire circumstances and needs help from another because of the impending danger. This, of course, is, however, a very rare instances, a very rare use of language in today's society. It happens, of course, but typically with human beings the way we are now, we have more moderate emotions that dictate our language, where just the simple cries of nature only happen every so often. Moderate feelings prevail in ordinary day-to-day life. The more in contact human beings come into with one another, the greater need there would be to develop varieties of language, different signifiers to discuss a wider range of ideas and adjectives and descriptions to communicate our understanding of the world. He contends that human nature, which, if you don't No, he often refers to human nature in the text as she. So human nature has little care for for facilitating human beings' social nature. She has contributed little to making them sociable, he writes, or to facilitate this evolution of language and the use of speech. Our mutual reliance on one another through language and its evolution has little to do with human nature, according to Rousseau. He then moves into what a dissenter from his position might contend, that many philosophers were saying that human nature is a state of misery. When you look at all of the violence and inequality in the world, one could only come to the conclusion that human beings are themselves naturally self-interested, wicked, and quite violent to one another. For Rousseau, these instances of evil stem more from human sociality and not from human's nature. For example, there is this contention that he has that one cannot possibly suffer when in a primitive state of nature, with free from all of the what he would think are chains of the social world. So he gets into the misery that is the basis of where the real misery is, which is society, not human nature. And this is again attributed to human progress in science, progress in reason, because these advancements, the more and more we advance, the more and more we distance ourselves from our true human nature. The more and more we are confounded and confused and tormented by this way of thinking that is not natural to us. Scientific thinking, he contends, is not a natural thing. It is a product, a mode of thought that comes out of human sociality, not human nature. I will quote from him here on page 42 on the right-hand column, about 3/4 of the way down the page. He says, quote, "On the other hand, nothing could be more unhappy than savage man, dazzled by science, tormented by his passions, and reasoning about a state different from his own. It appears that Providence most wisely determined that the faculties which he potentially possessed should develop themselves only as occasion offered to exercise them, in order that they might not be superfluous or perplexing to him." Okay, so we're going to turn to page 43 now. Rousseau again turns back to responding to this critique of human beings, perhaps most notably by the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who has a really cynical understanding of human beings and their vices and their violence and their self-interest. He handles the matter of the human beings' desire to preserve oneself, to protect oneself for their continued advancement. And he says that it is assumed that self-preservation is a wicked part of human nature. But here he actually makes the case that our feelings of wanting to defend ourselves and preserve ourselves actually leads to promoting peace between human beings, and it's actually self-preservation that is the basis of human morality. So it is neither the development of the understanding of law, the way we understand law, or the way law restrains our behavior that hinders one from doing immoral things, according to Rousseau. But rather it is what he says is the ignorance of vice, to never have been exposed to these wicked things in the first place, which society has exposed us to and human nature has not. So on this point, Rousseau talks about how self-preservation actually leads to feelings of pity for another. When we see other people suffering, we can imagine ourselves being in that situation and feel that suffering for them. It is the desire that we have to preserve ourselves, that we have empathy for others. he talks about this existing in other animals as well. One example he brings up is that it is well known that horses show a reluctance to trample on living bodies. And he also mentions examples of mothers being very consistently wanting to save their offspring from sources of danger. Okay. So we're going to turn to page 44, the last page for Rousseau now, and related to this point on self-preservation. Rousseau continues talking about how many people really would not feel distress and anxiety when seeing the suffering of another person. He mentions a fainting mother and a dying infant. How many people really, maybe with the exception of some radical sociopaths, would not feel some sort of anxiety and distress? So he refers to pity for others as a thing that is a natural sentiment, something that human beings naturally feel, and the love that we have for ourselves translates into pity and care that we have for others. Um, Pity he refers to as is a more perfect state of being than the laws and social conventions make people behave. It is rather the human nature, when uncorrupted by society, when uncorrupted by advancements in science and reason and laws and conventions, is when we are most willing to promote peace among one another and to facilitate mutual preservation in our interactions between human beings. This understanding, apologies, I think it cut out there. This understanding of human morality and stemming from self-preservation and pity and human nature stands in contrast to, say, Socrates, which Rousseau mentions at the very end, who believes that virtue comes through the advancement of reason. For Rousseau, quote, "The human race would long ago have ceased to exist if its preservation had depended solely on the reasoning of its members." I'll conclude with Rousseau before turning to Smith by saying that there is, of course, somewhat of an irony here with Rousseau in that he himself is a very knowledgeable and learned man who has read a great deal and has contributed to the advancement of knowledge that he so despises in many ways. So there's an irony underlying all of this philosophizing, this sort of anti-advancement of knowledge while contributing to the advancement of knowledge that's at play with his philosophizing. And with that, we conclude with Rousseau. I will now turn to Adam Smith. Okay, so we're now going to turn to Adam Smith, who is a Scottish philosopher who lived between 1723 and 1790. Brief overview of his life. He was kidnapped at the age of 4 by Romani people, though they quickly gave him back to his family. Adam Smith never married. Is something that comes up quite frequently in biographical overviews of him. He didn't seem to have much of a love life at all, and it was somewhat of a peculiar man. He studied political and moral philosophy at Glasgow, University of Glasgow and Oxford, finding the latter to be very disappointing in comparison to the University of Glasgow. And he is today seen as the father of capitalism and the father of conservative thinking. There should be a quick qualification here. The type of conservatism and pro-capitalism that Adam Smith advocates is considerably far removed from the type of conservatism you might see today. There are many distinctions between conservative thought during the Age of Enlightenment and conservative thought that you might be exposed to today. One very important distinction, I would say, between Adam Smith and maybe conservatism generally in the present day would be that he found it absolutely necessary for a society to have strong safety nets for its poor, He considered any society that does not look after its poor to be a wicked society. It's also worth noting that although he is considered to be a conservative philosopher, there are many philosophers who would be ideologically very different from him that admired him. Most notably would be Karl Marx, the father of communism, admired Adam Smith, the father of capitalism. Smith was described by several of his contemporaries and his biographers as being comically absent-minded, with very strange habits of speech. He was known to talk to himself, a habit that began during childhood, and he would very emphatically talk to himself to sort of invisible friends of his. According to another account, Smith had gotten distracted at night one time, and he went out walking in his nightgown, ending up around 15 miles outside of town before church bells woke him up back into reality. By all accounts, he was a very strange and peculiar person, though a nice man overall. And we talked very briefly about David Hume when we were covering Rousseau. Adam Smith was a very close friend of Hume, who he was 10 years younger than. Um, to add to some of the to some of his character, I'll note that Smith thought that speaking about his ideas in conversation might reduce the sale of his books. So his conversations were typically regarded as being not very impressive. He once said, perhaps jokingly, I'm not sure, that he, quote, made it a rule when in company never to talk of what he understood, end quote. Smith has been also described as someone who was not particularly handsome. This seems to be a thing that comes up often with biographers. They want to, I'm not sure why, but according to experts of Adam Smith, they often note that he did not have much of a love life, was never married, not a very particularly handsome man, and would joke about it himself, saying that he's only beautiful in writing. He was somewhat of a self-deprecating, albeit and perhaps a bit of a lonely man. And then Adam Smith died in Edinburgh, Scotland, on July 17th of 1790 after a painful illness. His body is buried in the Canongate Kirkyard in Edinburgh. This is actually a picture that I took when I was in Edinburgh. This is a picture of his grave. And on his deathbed, Smith expressed disappointment with himself, saying that he wished he had written and achieved more than he did. And with that, we're going to turn to the text. If you would turn to page 46. 46 is the most, there's a lot happening right on the first page. This slide might take a little bit of time, but just bear with me. When Smith has some commonalities with Rousseau in his understanding of human morality. In the same way that responding to certain critics of human selfishness and whatnot, Adam Smith understands human selfishness as being a necessary aspect of human morality. Self-interestedness, in his view, is absolutely essential to showing care and empathy for others. What might seem like selfish behavior, according to Smith, is actually human beings in exercising their virtue. He makes the case that self-interest is not only a matter for benefiting oneself, but could produce fortunes for others. He goes on to talk about how human beings think and imagine things. He says, since we don't have any immediate experience as to how another person thinks, we can never enter another person's mind and really understand their state of being. The way we try to feel for others is to insert ourselves into their situations, to try to imagine how we would feel and what type of state we would be in if we were in the same situation that they are in. We think about the pain and injury and suffering and misery we might face, and we feel that in the moment, even if it's not happening to us in that situation. It is our self-interestedness in this way, and our imagination of our self-preservation, that extends to us then feeling empathy for other human beings. So it is self-interestedness that rests at the foundation of morality. In this characterization, Smith writes, quote, "By the imagination we place ourselves in his situation, we conceive ourselves enduring all the same torments. We enter, as it were, into his body, and become in some measure the same person with him, and thence form some idea of his sensations, and even feel something which, though weaker in degree, is not altogether unlike them." A little later in the same paragraph, going on to say, "So to conceive or to imagine that we are in it being in the situation, excites some degree of the same emotion." So to put more concretely as to what that entails, Smith provides a few examples of us feeling not only stress and anxiety, but even sometimes actual pain when we see the pain of another. He talks about when seeing a stroke, that we then shrink, and we crawl back if we see let's say somebody's leg get really hurt. We kind of grab our own leg. It is our desire to preserve ourselves that then facilitates pitying emotions and empathetic emotions for the other. It is our way of extending ourselves into that situation that allows us to feel for others. This, of course, is beyond pain and sorrow, but we might feel joy for others who have had an experience that led to the emotion. We can feel resentment for others if we see our friends who have been wronged by others. We could feel misery for those that we see in very difficult situations. And then sometimes we could even feel emotions for other people if they are themselves not feeling that emotion. If any of you have ever heard of the term secondhand embarrassment, when you start feeling embarrassed, even though you didn't do anything, because you're watching another person embarrass themselves, though they might be completely oblivious to it. You feel the embarrassment for them because you imagine yourself being in that situation. So a lot of the times it's this person feels an emotion and then you feel it too by extending yourself into that situation. But sometimes they don't even need to feel the emotion. They could just be within a situation where maybe they should be embarrassed, but you'll take the front for them, so to speak. So he says here in the bottom right corner on page 47, quote, "We blush for the impudence and rudeness of another, though he himself appears to have no sense of the impropriety of his own behavior, because we cannot help feeling with what confusion we ourselves should be covered had we behaved in so absurd a manner." Okay. So now we get to the aspect of justice in Adam Smith's view, and how this enters the realm of how laws are how laws are enforced and the effect of them. He discusses the way in which resentment is seen as given to us by human nature as a way of defending ourselves from the wicked actions of others, but also resentment, when it enters the higher rungs of law and the higher rungs of society, it has a consequence of punishment for those who inflict these wicked actions upon others. So in this case, it acts as a deterrent for the person to behave in such a way. All right, and then on page 49, so when we're talking about this larger scale of resentment, this deterrent for Smith means leaving human society and being in a more sort of on your own state, where the punishment is that you are now in a place where nobody will care for you. When human society, where people have sort of self-interested based empathy. You'll have care being directed toward you for others. But if you don't reciprocate that same care, you will then enter into isolation where there is nobody to care for you. So those who violate justice, who have inflicted evil upon others, in Smith's view, it's maybe perhaps a little bit punitive, though he says they must feel the evil that they have inflicted onto others. So if it is not there, if they are distinct in that their nature does not allow them to have care for others, does not allow them their self-interest to be modified so that their self-interest is not just about preserving themselves, but can also be used for the mutual preservation of others, to extend to thinking about how other people might feel if they were put into a terrible situation. If this alone doesn't do it, if nature and empathy does not restrain you, then in Smith's view, the law and punishment need to restrain you to actually bring themselves into this state of being that they have brought other people into if they can't do it themselves. Okay. Okay. So here are some links to watch more about Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Adam Smith. Please do watch the first three. They're quite short, shouldn't take you much time at all, maybe about 20 minutes to watch all three. And then the fourth is optional. The fourth is a documentary about Adam Smith and talking about some of the other ways in which Adam Smith's philosophizing is still relevant today. Though please watch the first three. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to this lecture.